He seemed destined to be the chosen one. Before most people even understood how a set works, Robert Downey Jr. already had presence, timing, charisma, that kind of talent the camera hunts for. Hollywood loves stories like that. The prodigy, the promise, the name that's going to be huge. And for a while, everything confirms the expectation. But fame doesn't arrive as a prize. It arrives as a system. And that system doesn't feed only on what you deliver on screen, but on how much you can endure off it. The earlier success comes, the less room there is to make mistakes in silence. What would be a stumble for anyone else becomes a headline. What would be a phase becomes a label. And what should be private life turns into content. As the spotlight grows, so does a pressure that never shows up in interviews. Deadlines, demands, the need to always be ready, always available, always interesting. And alongside that pressure comes a temptation that's hard to refuse. Access. Access to parties, people, substances, circles where excess doesn't look like excess. It looks like normal. In public accounts, Downey has described how bad decisions and addiction crept in not like an earthquake, but like daily erosion. And when you're applauded all the time, it's easy to believe you're in control, until the day you realize you're not. Because fame, which should be proof that you made it, can become the force that erases what's inside. And that's exactly where the story starts to turn. Success speeds everything up, a packed calendar, stacked commitments, expectations that never shrink. And the industry has a silent rule. The more you're worth, the less you're allowed to fail. The problem is, no one becomes valuable without paying an emotional cost. The line between relieving the pressure and running from it gets thinner and thinner. There comes a moment when talent is no longer the center of the conversation. It's still there, of course, but it starts to be followed by doubts. Will he show up? Will he deliver? Will he be trouble? And in Hollywood, those questions work like slow poison. The more the world watches, the more any slip looks bigger than it is. And the harsher the judgment, the deeper the shame. And the deeper the shame, the easier it is to fall back into the same place where, for a few minutes, your mind goes quiet. Fame becomes both lens and magnet. It magnifies every mistake and attracts situations that make relapse easier. The social circle helps mask warning signs. The irregular routine makes it seem normal to live on the edge. And access makes it easier to repeat what destroys you. In interviews, he's described that cycle as something that hijacks your autonomy. You promise you'll stop, that it's the last time, that tomorrow you'll get organized, and before you know it, tomorrow has become a habit. Until the fall stops being only personal. Because there's a point when the system stops treating it as a phase and starts treating it as real risk. And when that happens, the consequence doesn't come with movie drama. It comes with paperwork, closed doors, and a heavy silence. When the industry starts measuring risk, everything changes. It doesn't matter how much talent exists. What matters is whether people can count on you. And suddenly, the story stops being about work and becomes about reliability. Every delay, every impulsive decision, every headline out of place adds up like evidence against you. Fame, once fuel, becomes a courtroom. The cruelest detail is that a fall doesn't have to be a big event. Sometimes it happens in small losses, a canceled meeting, an opportunity that shifted direction, an agent who dials back the enthusiasm, a studio that asks for guarantees. And once distrust sets in, it spreads fast. Because the market has selective memory, it forgets results and remembers risks. Meanwhile, people on the outside watch it like entertainment. Headlines simplify, the audience picks villains and heroes, and the real person is stuck in the middle, trying to keep life standing while everything turns into narrative. But reality doesn't get edited. It collects payment, and it collects it in money, in freedom, in reputation. What looked like glamour turns into wear and tear. From there, the turning point doesn't come with swelling music or an inspiring speech. It's humiliating, bureaucratic, expensive. There are legal consequences and a kind of exposure you can't control. The word that starts to define you is the one no artist wants to hear: unreliable. And in Hollywood, that label closes more doors than any bad review. And then comes what hurts most. Realizing the same system that lifted you quickly also knows how to abandon you efficiently. The phone stops ringing, and that's not a metaphor, it's routine. Invitations disappear, roles go to someone else, meetings turn into "we'll be in touch." The fall stops being a shock and becomes a condition. And in that condition, fame is still there, but with a different face. Instead of applause, surveillance. Instead of admiration, distrust. Instead of opportunity, demands. That's when the trap becomes clear. The industry turns people into products, and when the product shows instability, it tries to protect itself. But the person behind the product is still there, with addictions, fear, compulsions, and the feeling of having wasted something that once seemed rare. The world calls it self-sabotage, as if it were simple, as if wanting to change were enough. But addiction doesn't negotiate with willpower on good days. It shows up on bad ones. And at that point, there were plenty of bad days. Because beyond the internal wear, there was external weight, lawsuits, costs, consequences. Rock bottom is rarely poetic. It's repetitive. It's waking up and dealing with the damage. It's looking at your own story and feeling like it's being written by someone else. But there's a difference between falling and disappearing. And survival starts when someone realizes you can't fix the image before you fix the structure. For Downey, rebuilding wouldn't be a single redemption scene. It would be a long road, made of boundaries and unpopular choices, especially the choice to say no to what once felt impossible to refuse. Rebuilding comes slowly and without glamour. Discipline doesn't make headlines. Support doesn't get cover stories. Routine doesn't look heroic, but it's exactly what holds someone up when their whole life has learned to run on improvisation. Over the years, he's talked about the importance of building structure, the right people nearby, real commitments, responsibilities that leave no room for the old cycle. And no becomes a survival tool. No to certain environments, no to certain company, no to certain conveniences that seem harmless but carry triggers. Saying no when fame trained you to say yes to everything is almost a re-education. Because the entertainment system rewards excess. Excess work, excess visibility, excess availability. But excess is also fertile ground for relapse. Little by little, what seemed impossible happens. Trust returns. First in small bets, then in bigger opportunities. Not as charity, but as the result of consistency. Reputation stops being only past tense and starts being present tense. And when he returns to the top, the public calls it a comeback. But behind the label is something more specific. The awareness that fame without structure becomes a trap. He doesn't come back as someone who defeated Hollywood. He comes back as someone who understood the mechanism and decided not to be swallowed by it. The thing is, at the peak, almost no one notices what's cracking on the inside until the break becomes visible. And the final lesson isn't about celebrity. It's about limits. Robert Downey Jr.'s story isn't that of a saint or a villain. It's the story of someone brilliant inside a system that lifts fast, charges dearly, and doesn't always sustain what it promises. Fame can feel like freedom, but it can also become a lens that amplifies flaws and an access point that makes falling easier. When everything around you normalizes excess, the collapse doesn't start with the scandal. It starts in the invisible part, when no one can see what's breaking inside. Sometimes not even the person themselves. The moral here is simple. Talent opens doors, but it doesn't keep you standing. What keeps you standing is structure, discipline, support, hard choices, and the courage to refuse what, for a long time, felt indispensable. The real turning point isn't a cinematic moment. It's a string of ordinary days handled well. Now I want to hear from you. At what point do you think fame stops being a prize and becomes a trap? Leave a comment below. If this story made you think of someone who's fighting in silence, share the video. It might be the push they need to ask for help or recognize themselves in the process. And if you want to keep seeing the hidden side of fame, the real cost of stardom, the falls almost no one understands, and the rebuilds almost no one sees, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. In the next episode, we'll dive into another trajectory where the applause came with a bill, and the bill almost won.